Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing Queenie. Now, over the years since maybe 2011, I would say probably arguably before that, I've had an interest in British culture, especially Black British culture. My parents and grandparents grew up in countries that had been British colonies, and living here in America, I grew up with some of that influence, not of them being British, obviously, but rather from being from colonial countries. And with that, them consuming British media, especially having grown up in New York where you have PBS, and as part of PBS programming, they had some shows from the BBC. And so as a kid, I grew up watching those channels because they were some of the few channels that showed Caribbean programming. And especially like on Sundays, you would get like quite a bit of British programming. And my grandmother really loved British comedies, so I ended up liking British comedies. And so this was like Keeping Up Appearances, The Vicar of Dibley, Mr. Bean. As a kid, I was exposed to that kind of content. And by virtue of what the adults around me were watching, I watched a lot of those shows. Later on in like 2011, Netflix started getting a bit of British programming. And one of the first shows that I watched was Top Boy. And this was before you had this golden era of television here in America brought about through streaming. And so through that, I developed an interest in Black British culture, read quite a number of books, watched TV shows, listened to podcasts, followed British boxing. And so originally, I thought this book took place here in America, and it was about some woman named Queenie, but getting into the book and reading like the summary and getting more of a feel for it, I realized it's actually about a woman in her mid-20s in London. And it takes place over about a year in the course of her life and follows some of the ups and downs in her life. Much of it spurred by her relationship trauma, personal issues, and things like that. I'm going to be honest, there were points where I actually did not like this book. Didn't care for the character, and just could not get with some of her life decisions. But as the book went on, I continued to push through the book because I felt like the author was ramping up to something deeper behind the initial story. And I'm actually glad that I read it through to the end. Now, that doesn't mean that the book is flawless or anything like that, but I think that the ending of the book was pretty redemptive for some of the problematic parts in the middle. So basically, you have Queenie. She is a Black woman of African descent, right? She's a Black woman of Jamaican descent, to be more accurate, living in London. And her and her partner have been together for 3 years, but are separating. They share an apartment, and some things have taken place in their relationship where he's decided that he wants to take a break from the relationship. And the book starts off with her kind of getting herself together, trying to prepare to find a place of her own. Still being in shock and disbelief about how things are unfolding, but she has this circle of friends who form like the nucleus of her friend group. She works at a newspaper where she works with her friend Darcy. She then has 2 other friends that she's met in other ways, and kind of has like a diverse friend group and begins to lean on them as she tries to navigate this new phase of her life. Because her boyfriend, especially because they've lived together, he's formed a substantial part of her social group and was a part of her social outings. He was, for a period of time, the person closest to her and most consistently present in her life. And it's now a really big adjustment for her to get used to him not being there. But at the same time, there's this degree of uncertainty, her kind of holding out hope that they'll get back together. And so that results in her kind of making some decisions along the way that are problematic. The story, for the most part, is told chronologically, where we're here in her present, where her and the boyfriend have separated, but there are some moments where I guess you could consider them as flashbacks, where she looks back at moments from the past in their relationship, reflects on them. Certain things might trigger these memories. Her family being West Indian, well, Jamaican actually, she mostly grew up with her grandparents in Brixton. That's still where her grandparents live. It's where she recalls a good amount of her childhood memories, living in Brixton, which is in South London. With the boyfriend, she's lived in a different part of London as he's a white Englishman. And in them separating, she now finds herself going back to the neighborhood. And with that, there's conversation about gentrification. And in returning home, it's funny because she hasn't been there in some time. But when she goes back, there are places that would have been considered landmarks to her that are no longer present. The city is changing, even relatively far outside of the main area of London. The Brixton that she knows, the home that she knows, this neighborhood that she knew is no longer what it once was when she was growing up there. And so with that, there's some adjustment. She returns back to Brixton and is surprised by just how much things have changed. There's a bakery that had been around since she was a child, and it's no longer there. It really serves to show just how disconnected she is from this community, and that arguably not in the time since being with her boyfriend, but maybe even before then, she's just kind of been out of touch with everything that was going on in the community. But she makes an effort to go out and to kind of keep herself busy. But it's a little bit awkward because her friend group, the people that she socializes with, because her and her partner have been together for some time, everyone knows him. And it's like her showing up without him leads to just constant questions of people asking, where he is. And it's like, if you think of it as like picking a scab, where this is a new situation for her not being with the boyfriend anymore. And there's some adjustment to now go from this long experience of having been a twosome to now being solo. And so there's some discomfort in that. This is a guy that she cared about, that she thought when she got to the point of being comfortable and being ready to have a family, that he would be the one that she would have a family with. Based on where things currently stand, there's a chance that might not be the case, but she's holding out hope that they might get back together. Quite honestly, there's a few instances where there are flashbacks in the book to moments from her relationship with this guy, and some of them are positive. There's definitely some sweet moments, but then at the same time, there are instances where the boyfriend doesn't sound completely terrible, but he doesn't sound like the best person for her to be with either. And that's not to say that black and white people can't be together, but there are a few instances where there's kind of microaggressions, not necessarily from him, but rather rude and inappropriate comments made by his family members. And there's the problem with him is that there's this dismissiveness where she would get upset about it. And I feel like you have some people that are drama-filled, where they create just a world of problems anywhere they go. But I feel like that's not what was going on here. Where it's you have some instances where his family members are making inappropriate comments, and he wouldn't defend her, or he wouldn't stand up for her or try to bring it to a stop. And I think it's one of those courtesies that you extend in a relationship. You corral your family, I corral mine. So it's when things like this happen, I think you as the partner whose relative is being inappropriate, you should be the one to rein them in. You defend your partner. If your partner is doing wrong, you pull them off to the side and you talk to them, and you do the same for your family. Just a matter of courtesy. If you bring a friend to your house or to a family gathering and you have family members who are being rude to them or saying inappropriate things because that person is your guest, I think you should make the effort to fix the situation. Let your family member know, hey, this isn't okay. Stop. You correct that behavior. But here it is that over the course of the book, she recalls multiple instances where it's he's sweet in a way, he does nice things, yes, but at the same time, there's some passive aggressiveness where he blames her for things that are other people's fault, where it's obviously, she's not the problem in those situations. That's not to say she isn't always the issue or that she doesn't sometimes cause problems, but there are a few instances, or there are several instances where she's not the one causing the drama. Someone else is, quite often his family member, and he just brushes off her feelings and concerns. And I just don't think that's right. Ultimately, after a few of those flashbacks, I was kind of you know what? I don't think this guy sounds like such a good match for you. And I think he actually might be better off just letting that one go. Because when you dig deeper into things, he doesn't seem like a good match. He doesn't seem like a good catch either. A partner who doesn't stand up for you in situations with problems with their family. It's you married this man. These are problems that you're going to have to deal with. And so it's like, while the character is lamenting this man putting the relationship on pause, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, I don't really see what it is that you're clinging to. If anything, this sounds like a relationship that might serve you better by letting it go. And I think sometimes that might be the reality of people in relationships, where relationships become comfortable. And it's not to say that the other person is bad or what have you, but it's like a relationship isn't serving you, or it's making you unhappy, but people remain in them because it's what they know. It's what they're comfortable with. I guess you might be fearful about branching out and starting over with someone new. And so you might excuse problematic behavior, overlook things that you probably shouldn't. And so it's like with this guy, I was just kind of like, she was holding out hope that they would get back together. And I was like, I really don't see why. You know, like, for sure, he's not all bad. I don't think most people are. And there's instances of him doing like really nice things for her. But at the same time, there's also these glaring problems. And it's like, it's one thing if there are problems and he was trying to work with her to correct them. But if there are problems, these are things in the relationship that make you unhappy, and he's not even willing to discuss them. I don't know how sustainable that relationship is. But on a whole, for a good part of the book, what you have is her engaging in these unhealthy relationships. I mean, her relationship with the boyfriend is problematic, yes, but it's sadly not like the worst relationship or situation that she gets into over the course of the book. And it's like, I just found it kind of tiring. The book was... I read the synopsis of the book some time ago, the summary of the book, when I first added it to my reading list. And I went into it and decided that I would just listen to it. I listened to the audiobook and hadn't revisited the summary in some time. So I went into it a bit blind. And as I was reading, I was like, what kind of nonsense is this? Because it's like, during her separation from this guy, she ends up getting into relationships, and not even relationships, situations, let's say, entanglements maybe, with other guys, where it's like, just mess after mess after mess. And it's like, I don't know why you're entertaining this nonsense. There's like this one guy who's married and just absolutely crass. And the way he speaks to her, it's like, in my personal life, I just don't have patience to deal with people like this. Maybe it's not the best way to be, but it's like, by about halfway through the book, I was just annoyed with her, because it's like, I can't read stuff like this with the constant drama. But fortunately, she had a good support system, a good friend group who supported her through the twists and turns of her navigating this problematic time in her life, of her trying to get her bearings. And as part of that, you know, it's all, some of the stuff that she was engaging in. I should tell you that if you decide to pick up this book, it's probably not for you if sexual content makes you uncomfortable, because honestly, some of her exchanges made me uncomfortable, because like, her behavior was just very problematic. And it's like, it's very problematic for you to be engaging in this kind of stuff. But I felt there was going to be a deeper message. The author was moving towards a larger discussion. So I kept pushing through. But if things like that are a trigger for you or make you uncomfortable, I'm going to tell you with all honesty that this might not be the book for you. But if there's sexual content in the book, it doesn't bother me if it makes sense within the context of the story. But some of the stuff here, because the author eventually gets around to making a point, but it's like, it's a journey to get there. It's a task. You have to wade through quite a bit to get to the message. And the message is important, as eventually Queenie makes like some bad decisions with regards to romantic and sexual relationships, to the point that it begins affecting her work. It has a negative impact on her work, her and the boyfriend. You know, London is an expensive place to live, and so she has a job, but it's like not the greatest paying job. It results in her having, with them separating, it results in her having to find a new place and stuff like that. But it's like, she gets into trouble at work because she's so distracted. And it's just like, girl, like, get yourself together. And it's like, understand, you are going to have to decide to read this book. There's going to be moments where you'll sit there and just want to pull your hair out in frustration, or like throw the book across the room. But ultimately, you get down to where she starts dealing with some of her problems and past childhood drama, and you learn more about her background, because as the story unfolds, we're dealing with her in the here and now, but there are flashbacks, and we then meet her grandparents and her aunt and cousin, and then eventually her mother, and we learn more about her backstory. And it helps to put her experiences into context, because when you read through, it's like, why would someone engage in unhealthy behavior like this? Why would someone allow themselves to be treated like this? And I kept reading because I felt there was going to be more. There was a point to the story, that eventually the author would fill in her backstory. And I was hoping that there would be some kind of explanation for that really troubling behavior, or the troubling behavior that she accepted and was engaging in. And fortunately, that's what ended up happening. All in all, I thought it was a good, but not a great book. I think like the ending of it really helped to lift my view of the book, as it was a bear for a good amount of the story. It's realistic in a sense because unfortunately people go through these kinds of things in life. It's especially sad, the things that she endures. It's a fictional account. It's a novel. But in reading this book, some of the things that she experiences, some of the relationship drama that she engages in and that she allows, there are real people that deal with this kind of stuff. And so it's like, from that perspective, I think it might be triggering for some people. But I think that you can read it if you find yourself exhibiting these kinds of behavior. I feel like these kinds of books can kind of be a wake-up call that some people might need, where in seeing someone else experience something like this, because it's related, but removed from your personal situation, it might give you a little bit of distance and the ability to more clearly see the situation and assess it for what it really is. And so with that, like taking those things into consideration, I actually think it's a good book worth checking out. There's some themes discussed here, like about child abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and really how we raise children, the experiences that we have as children, and how it can affect us as adults. And one of the reasons that I'm actually really happy that I stuck with the book was that things reach a point in the book where she ends up having to go back to live with her grandparents. And there's this discussion of, her grandparents, her grandmother in particular. They love and care for her, but ultimately it's like she's spiraling and engaging in very unhealthy and dangerous behavior that results in medical professionals making the recommendation that she seek therapy. And in going to therapy, that's when she starts to explore some of her early experiences. And it puts into context some of her behavior as an adult, some of these problematic behaviors that she's engaging in. And so it's like, looking at it, I felt like it sparked a really good conversation at that point, or touched on a really important conversation for us to have as a community. Because with things kind of spiraling out of control and her engaging in very risky and dangerous behavior, it spirals to the point where she's pretty much on the verge of a mental breakdown. There's this drama of what's going on with this relationship, her romantic relationship with the boyfriend. That's part of it, yes. But on a deeper level, there's also all of this unresolved stuff from her childhood. Like, that's really the underlying thing that's causing her, that's contributed to some of the problems in her relationships, that's contributing to some of this unhealthy behavior and these unhealthy practices that she's engaging in. And so it's like, when we get to the point where she starts to go to therapy and we get a better understanding of her backstory, it puts those things in context, where she also starts to work on resolving some of those issues. And it's like, sure, there's a thing that she's dealing with now, the relationship with the boyfriend, but some of those problems, those behaviors are really like things from her childhood. And her finally dealing with those problems, instead of like continuing to kick the problem down the road, ignoring those things, it eventually allows her to free herself from those past childhood traumas. But as part of that, it's like, as this takes place, while things have changed in her life, she's now living back at home at her grandmother's house with her grandparents. Her grandmother is initially very resistant to her going to therapy because her grandmother looks at it as bringing shame on the family. Her mother had like similar experiences in her own young adulthood, and it really threw her life off track. And so it's kind of like a source of embarrassment for her grandmother. And so the grandmother has kind of internalized this idea that difficulties occur in life and you just deal with it as best as you can and move on, but not really fully realizing the extent of the things that Queenie has been through, the extent of the things that Queenie's mother has been through, and that they're still struggling. They're having a hard time coping with these things that they've experienced. And so it's like, initially her grandmother was resistant to Queenie going to therapy because of her feeling that this would bring shame on the family. She kind of feels like therapy isn't something to be done, right? Like, you deal with your problems in silence, and privacy, preserving reputations and things like that are important, but ultimately she comes to see just how much Queenie is suffering. And contributing to her grandmother coming around is that the grandfather finally speaks up. He's there, but he's not usually very active in whatever's going on in the family. But ultimately he ends up speaking up and admits that, you know what? Maybe it's time that, given all the things that we've been through as a family, it might be a good idea for somebody to go on ahead and try to get some therapy and really address and work through the various problems in their life, instead of just trying to push through or ignore it or just hope that it'll go away. And that maybe with all that Queenie is going through, with these problems that she's having, the best thing might not be to just keep it to herself, or not just to keep it in the family, but rather to go on ahead and get some professional help to truly address the problems that she's dealing with. And so I felt like that was the high point of the book for me. Queenie's low point, really. Because with that, it's like things started to turn around. It's like the book covers a year of her life, really, her hitting this low point in her life and then working her way back. But the high point for me was really when she started therapy and started really dealing with and addressing the problems in her life, the root of the problems in her life. And it's like these various issues that she was having. So it's like, I'm actually glad that I didn't give up the book and I continued pushing through, because getting to the point of the book was like really a high point for me. And with that, I highly recommend Queenie, for its commentary on mental health, the importance of getting help, moving past this old-fashioned idea of just keeping things to yourself. It turned out to be an incredible book. Not perfect, but incredible once it gets to its point. It just takes a little while to get there. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more book recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my book review playlist.